So this isn't simply a conversation about those who have left the church and it's like you still have faith, but you're not going anywhere. This is also about people who are currently in a church. They're kind of feeling down, but they don't know where to go because their friends are there. And so they just kind of hang out because that's their community, whether they believe or not. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Whiskey and the Writings. This is a place where we slow down, we pour a drink, and we wrestle with the big questions of faith, scripture, and life. This is a space for the spiritually curious, the skeptic, and the seeker who still wonders if there's still something good and true at the heart of it all. I'm your host, Joe Oliver, and I'm glad you're here. So today on Whiskey and the Writings, we are having a conversation about our faith in the midst of uncertainty and doubt, when you feel like you're done and you're done with faith or Jesus or religion, but you still have at the core something that you believe in. So we're going to wrestle with that today and look at how we can find a way forward when you feel like you have something there, but whatever your journey has led you, you're just more and more growing, distrust, or maybe you feel like the spaces where you've experienced your faith in the past aren't places where you can experience them today, and you just don't know where to go. We're going to talk about that. But before we do, I want to introduce a whiskey that we've not had on this channel before. This is one that I found on the shelf. So Old Forester is a pretty common brand of bourbon. I found this one because, when I look for whiskeys, I like a little bit higher proof in my whiskeys. So this is 100 proof Old Forester. It's, you can't really go wrong with Old Forester. They have lots of different variations of their bourbons that you can get on the store. You'll get them at any liquor store. They're everywhere. But for this one, I saw the 100 proof. It was kind of a special edition here that I just wanted to pick up and try. So I have no idea how this is going to taste and how this will come out, but we're going to go ahead and give it a shot here today. So I just pour myself a little sipper. I've had Old Forester in the past, not a lot actually. It's not something that's common on my shelf. But again, it's not because it's bad or anything. It's just because usually it's a little bit on the spendier side. And so this was kind of a treat to get this. And so whatever you have in front of you, great. Pour your drink. Excuse me. Whatever you have in front of you, pour your drink. We'll go ahead and get started. Drink responsibly, and cheers. Okay, didn't have the bite that I expected. Definitely the smokiness that I can taste on the back end. It's good. This is a good, smooth bourbon. Man, I really like this. Yeah. All right, there we go. 100 proof, Old Forester, straight Kentucky straight bourbon. Yeah, it's really good. Okay, so we're going through like why faith still matters, even when you feel done with your faith. And there's just a lot of people, I bring this up because there's a lot of people that I talk to that are in that place of transition in their belief. I have a saying that I've said before on this channel where we talk about those who still believe, but maybe just not like they used to. That encompasses a lot of people on their journey where they grew up in a church environment, their parents are Christians, and they've experienced certain belief systems that they held to as a kid. But as they've grown older, they've heard more, they've experienced more, and it's not adding up together. It's not as simple as maybe it once was presented to them as a kid. I know for me, My journey was a little bit like that when I began to work out my faith for myself. Some call that deconstruction and reconstruction, where I deconstructed out of a framework of thinking that was not helpful and reconstructed a faith that actually became more vibrant and robust than I could ever imagine. And I'm so thankful for that. And I know that like that concept of deconstruction actually gets a bad rap with a lot of people because they think that those who are deconstructing just don't want to, submit to authority, or they, one thing that I've heard people say that just really annoys me when this conversation of deconstruction comes up is for church leaders especially, and it's always the church leaders that are like accusing people who are walking out of faith scenarios that they're just wanting to justify their own sin or to be able to do whatever they want to do, or they don't want to submit. And it's just categorically wrong. That's not to say that there aren't people that maybe do that, but it's too much of a blanket statement. For me, at least all the people I've ever talked to that are truly working out their faith and deconstructing, whether or not they find their way back into a local church or not, is not because they're just going, well, I just want to go and do what I want and I don't want to submit to anything. And so I'm just going to deconstruct because it's an easy way out. Like, no, those people that are uh, essentially giving up on church because they just don't want to follow the way of Jesus, whatever that's been presented to them, they just leave, right? They're not on a journey of deconstruction. Deconstruction comes from a place where you want to actually go like, what I've been told, there's something not adding up. And so I need to work through that pain and that discomfort and that question and that tension in order to come out with a answer on some level. And so it just, that always frustrates me when I hear those kinds of conversations, and I see them a lot. I mentioned that on my last video, just the other day, coming across a video where these two church leaders are sitting there bashing on people who are leaving the church, saying, oh, they just don't want to submit to authority. They have too much pride. And I'm like, where do you get off? Like, putting that on someone, or on all people who are in that same place. It's spiritual leadership that is driven through pride and a desire to protect empire. Those are the people that talk like that. And it's just, I reject it entirely. That being said, there is this journey that we go on, and faith still matters to many of these people. I know for me, like I said, going back to the journey I was on, and I've told this story before, but there was a time in my spiritual journey. So I became a Christian in the Pentecostal tradition. So it's a spiritual kind of if you're not sure what Pentecostalism is, just think of those who speak in tongues and who dance and in the service, and just, real robust worship and kind of like get to the altar, and very experiential Christianity, where it's like you got to feel something to think that God is there. And that's not all Pentecostalism, but that was the tradition I was in for sure, where it's like if you're not at the altar, if you're not at the front kneeling down, crying and worshiping or praying or repenting or whatever, you're just not a good Christian. Well, I wouldn't say that, but that was definitely the impression that you got. So that was a part of my tradition. And so as I came up in that, I became a youth pastor in that tradition. I believed what that faith tradition taught me about things like the end times, about things like spiritual gifts. There was a lot that I learned there because I didn't know any better. I became a Christian in that environment, and it just kind of was like, I didn't know what was out there. I wasn't a Christian before. So it was a foreign concept to think of other religions. And in some degree, when I was a young teenager, I thought all churches did it like that. That's how kind of ignorant I was towards faith systems at that time. But I remember distinctly, I was a youth pastor at a local church, and it was maybe I was 2-3 years in on this journey of working at this church. and things were going great. I loved what I did. I loved the teenagers. We did a lot of really cool stuff in those early years of youth ministry, and I just had a blast doing it. I mean, it was your atypical early 2000s youth ministry type environment. There was a lot, if I could go back and do it differently, boy, would I. A lot of things that if I were to see youth kids from that day, from those days, I would probably apologize for some of the ways that I probably led to some of the trauma that they feel about religion today. But by and large, I hope that they remember it fondly. I do, even though I would change a few things. Okay, so I digress. I bring up this story because it was about a couple years in. I had a coworker that was a dear friend of mine, is a dear friend of mine, Mario, and Mario's a deep thinker. And I remember him challenging me one day. He said, "Hey Joe, is the initial physical evidence that you've been baptized in the Holy Spirit is that you speak in tongues, which is a core tenet of the faith tradition I was in. And if I didn't give it away, you probably know what faith tradition that is. But where the belief is that the proof that you are baptized in the Holy Spirit is that you get this gift called speaking in tongues. That's a big part of that movement. And so that's a core tenet of their faith tradition. And so he asked me that question. And honestly, that's the first time anyone ever asked me whether or not the thing I believed was actually true. Now, think about that for a second. I became a Christian when I was 15, late 15, early 16, started in a youth ministry, felt that I should go into being a youth pastor. And so I worked on that. I got a job as a youth pastor, was working there for a few years. And for the first time, someone actually asked me a question: is this thing that you believe, is it actually true? Which is an argument to say, have you thought about it? And if you have, could you argue for it? And I thought I could, but the very question itself just kind of shook me a little bit, like, wait a minute. Why would you even ask that question? Of course it's true. Why is it true? Because that's what we've been taught. And so this began this kind of opening up of my mind and my heart to think for myself, a thinking faith. What is it that I actually believe versus what I'm being told to believe? And that's not to say that those who were telling me what to believe or preaching what we believe were wrong or evil or whatever. But it was just one of those things that, if you understand what I'm talking about, when you go to church and it's kind of, you just believe whatever's being told to you, you don't think for yourself, it's problematic. And that was like late 90s, early 2000s Christianity, where this kind of thing was normative. So anyway, so that being said, so that kind of kickstarted this concept. Well, at the same time, there was a traveling preacher, and this was big in our tradition, where this traveling preacher would come to town, and for a week we would do what's called revival services. And every night we would basically do church, and this preacher would be the main preacher every night for this revival week. And this was a pretty common thing. Once a year, this church did this. And I was used to it. It's stuff that I'd experienced before. And the revival week was really all about, spiritual gifts and baptism in the Holy Spirit and people speaking in tongues. And so one night before the service was going to get started, we were in the back room together with this preacher, my friend Mario, myself. And I remember turning to this preacher and asking this question. I said, "Hey," I won't say his name. I said, "Hey, is it true that the proof that you're baptized in the Holy Spirit is that you speak in tongues?" A very honest question, right? A very genuine question. But the way that this preacher led out changed the trajectory for me forever. And I think in a good way. So maybe I could thank him for this if I ever met him again. But he said, who have you been reading? And you need to stop that. Like, can you imagine? Like, the response wasn't, "Oh, well, let me walk you through this. Oh, let's talk about that. Oh, that's a great question. This is why we believe this, and this is why we teach this." The first response by this leader was to condemn the fact that I'm even asking the question, and to question that I'm being led astray by someone else teaching something else. And I went, "Oh," we dropped it. We moved on, but I never looked back. And so that I tell that story because that began a journey in me to begin to really push and question and think through the things that I believe. And I am so grateful for that. Here's the thing. I had faith that there was nothing about God or Jesus that I had troubles with. It was, what about God and Jesus do I actually believe? And so, okay, time for a quick pause. If Whiskey in the Writings has been helpful to you, there's a deeper layer of this conversation happening off of YouTube. Over on storiesoftove.com, Whiskey in the Writings has its own home. That's where I share extended reflections, behind-the-scene thoughts, and upcoming conversations that have never made it into these videos. It's also where you can sign up for our newsletter. No spam, no noise, just thoughtful writing, and a heads up on what's coming next. If you want to stay connected beyond the algorithm, head over to storiesoftove.com and sign up for the newsletter today. All right, let's get back into it. There's this idea of what do you do with a faith when you're actually being challenged in your own faith, when maybe you feel like you're done. You still believe, but maybe just not like you used to. And if that's you, I want to encourage you with a couple thoughts here on this video, because I actually think that's a lot of people. And it's a lot of people that are not simply have left the church. It's a lot of people that are in the church. See, there's a thing about churches today that have a culture of tribalism. And what I mean by that is that churches, and if you're, so in my last video, sorry, my brain's like processing right now. In my last video, I talked a lot about how churches resemble more like businesses than they do, organic faith communities. And there's a reason for that. And I kind of add my critique as to why and some thoughts around that. But through that lens, because these churches look this way, it creates a culture of tribalism that you have to be in. And if you are, if you're not believing and not participating and not giving and not serving, you are on the outside of that community. I mean, tell me if this is true or not, that in your experience, if you've gone to church long enough, there is a movement towards the middle. And if you aren't doing what the middle is doing, then there's an aspect of what's wrong with you. And so what happens is that no one wants to be on the outside, right? Like no one wants to feel like they don't belong. And so what happens is that people play a role even if they don't believe. And over the course of years, people build relationships. This is why, leaving churches is so difficult. Not because you're leaving the leader can sometimes be easier than leaving the people, because you build such strong bonds in a relationship with people that walking away from that can be extremely difficult. And so what happens is, and I've seen this, and I've talked to people who are in these places where it's like, these are where my friends are, so I'm just going to stay here. And the question is like, well, do you believe what they believe? And they're like, no, I don't believe what they believe. I don't even like listening on Sundays, but my friends are here. But these are the people I like to be around. And so what happens is that churches who think that they're actually moving forward are actually, in some cases, building complacency and tribalism. And I say all of that to say this is why it's difficult for people to even though they don't believe what's being said, they feel done inside. They feel done with the systems that churches become, the businesses that churches become, but they still have faith and they're still processing. So this isn't simply a conversation about those who have left the church and it's like you still have faith, but you're not going anywhere. This is also about people who are currently in a church, and they're kind of feeling down, but they don't know where to go because their friends are there, and so they just kind of hang out because that's their community, whether they believe or not. So if you're in that place, I just want to encourage you with an area of the text that I find comforting and helpful in these situations, and then maybe provide a way forward for you if you're in that place. So there's a story in the Bible that stands out to me when it comes to this conversation. It's about the disciples. It's about Jesus. It's about a person who needs healing and deliverance, and it's about a father. And so these characters come together in the biography of Mark, according to Mark. And in the 9th chapter, you have this movement of Jesus. So Mark's biography is set up to progress. It's an action-based writing. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of movement that's happening where Jesus is on the move towards something. So Mark is building his narrative around moving towards the cross and resurrection, primarily the cross, but because the resurrection part, it's there, but not like the rest of the biographies. That's a conversation for a different time. But the premise here is that Mark has been building towards something, and the climax of that upward movement for Jesus and the story that Mark is telling is the transfiguration. It's a story in Mark chapter 9 where Jesus goes up on a mountaintop, and there he is revealed, has a conversation with Moses and Elijah. It's this whole very interesting story that is not the point of this story, but building up here so you can understand where we're going. And from that moment, it is a straight movement of Jesus moving towards the cross, moving towards Jerusalem, and the intensity around that movement begins to intensify in the stories that Mark talks about. And so I say all that to say there's the very next story after they come off the mountain is the one that I want to highlight here. And I'll just paraphrase or just kind of tell a bit of it to get to the point that I want to get to here. So what happens is the disciples have been told and encouraged and sent out to be able to do healings and spread the message that Jesus had been preaching during his ministry. And so they've kind of been sent out to go out and do those things. And what happens is that they go out and they come across a person who is, according to how the text says it, is possessed by a spirit that makes him mute, so he can't talk. So there is this spiritual implication about his ability to actually communicate, and that he bursts into seizures and convulsions that at times is so severe he'll fall into fire or fall down and hurt himself. And so the father is distraught with what's happening with his son, and so he brings him to the disciples, but the disciples can't cast out the spirit, can't bring deliverance to this man's son. So what happens is that the father brings his son to Jesus, explains the situation. In verse 20, it goes like this. So they brought the boy to him, to Jesus. When the spirit saw him, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell on the ground, rolled around, foaming at the mouth. So there's this idea here that we need to be comfortable with thematically when we read this, that when we read the stories of Jesus, there are two things at play at the same time. One, Jesus is bringing restoration, healing, wholeness to humans. He is bringing about the way of God on the earth and bringing a way of living to human beings that will allow them to flourish. And at the same time, he is dealing with the spiritual forces that are behind the scenes that are also at play that he's doing battle with. So there's two things in the stories of Jesus that he's doing battle with, both the human beings and the spiritual beings. Now, You can categorically reject spirituality and spiritual things. I don't. I do believe that there are spiritual forces at play and at work in the world. And what Jesus comes to do is to put those things in their place. And so what happens is you have a story. What would you expect if Jesus is here to do battle with these two things? You would expect stories where those two things are confronting Jesus. And so you have a person who is under the influence of a spiritual force or being that recognizes the power and authority of Jesus and begins to reveal itself in its power over this person by bringing him into a seizure state, and he's foaming at the mouth. And so, one might say, well, they thought that was a spiritual being, but the reality is we know science and we know medical, and the kid just was having a seizure, and they just thought it was a spirit. That's one way of thinking. But again, I actually do think that there are spiritual forces at play in our world. So it's not a far stretch for me to say that the story that's being retold here is an accurate statement. Now, also remember this, okay? And we've talked about this with our story when we talk about the biographies of Jesus and even the written literature as a whole. These are theological works as much as they are historical, which means that this is not video cam footage of an event that took place. This is a story that has been told and told and told after the events. I mean, it probably spread and people talked about this. And by time it was written down, Mark is telling this story not just to give you a cool story about Jesus, but he's doing something theological. Remember the story just before it, Jesus is revealed to be the true, angel of the Lord that is in all his glory and has a conversation with Moses and Elijah on the mountaintop. Like, there's tons of theological things that could be unpacked just in that story. And once again, the very next story isn't just to move on and go like, okay, well, now we're just going to give you a little history about Jesus. Mark is doing something here. He's trying to do theology, which is to say there's something that Jesus is doing that has a theological implication about the whole of what God is up to in the world. Okay. So the story goes that Jesus turns to the Father. So the boy is on the ground, foaming at the mouth, and one would expect that you would get down and try to help the boy. Jesus just turns to the Father, which I find interesting. And he asks the dad, he says, how long has this been happening to him? And the dad says, from childhood. It's often thrown him into fire or water to destroy him. But if you are able to do anything, have compassion on us and help us. So it moves from singular to communal. And now, isn't this interesting that the dad is also looking for something from Jesus, not simply for his boy. He could have said, do something for him, help him. But it turns to an us reality that oftentimes when we experience difficulty or tragedy or suffering of some kind, it is rarely simply a me thing. It often turns into an us thing, that there are others involved in this. And when we are dealing with faith and belief, the same is true, that when you are like, I'm done, it's rarely something that you just do on your own. It impacts people. There are other people involved in that faith journey that you're in. And so he says, help us. The dad is as much impacted by the situation as the son, just in different ways, right? I love how Jesus responds to him. He says, if you are able, ? That's in verse 23. If you are able, like Jesus even challenges, like, wait a minute. And this goes back to a statement that Jesus says earlier in this story about like this faithless generation. Like Jesus has been someone that is known to do miraculous things. Like up until this point in the previous 8 chapters, you have seen Jesus, if you've been reading the story, do amazing things. They have seen him do stuff. They have heard the stories. They have seen the people that have come out of the healings that Jesus has provided. And the guy's going, if you are able. Like, so Jesus in a way is a bit frustrated, and that's okay. Like, he's frustrated because he's going, man, you have seen so much. and you still doubt. Sometimes I wonder how often Jesus gets frustrated at us, right? Like, how many times do I find myself going, man, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to work. I'm not sure I believe this. And Jesus going, oh man, Joe, like how many times have I proven myself to you? How many times have you experienced my grace and goodness and kindness and love and mercy through the lives of people around you, through my spirit growing within you? And Jesus just kind of going, oh my gosh. So I love this response because it challenges me in this reality of Jesus going like, the thing about like faith and this trust isn't about the present. Trust is about remembering the past. Okay? Trust isn't about the present situation. Faith, which is, trusting God, comes from remembrance of the past. That's why in the Hebrew scriptures, God continually, or the writers and the prophets and Moses, and they continually encourage the Israelites, remember how God brought you out of Egypt. Remember how God brought deliverance. Remember how God did this and that. Because trust isn't about what's happening right now. Faith is never about what's happening now, having faith. It's about remembering what God had done. That allows you to have the faith in the present. And so what he's getting at, he's like, if you're able, man, don't you know that faith isn't about what you see right now. It's about remembering what I've been faithful to do in the past. And so he says, all things are possible for the one who believes. For the one who believes. Immediately, the father of the boy cried out and said, I believe. Help my unbelief. This is the state where I find most people who are in a status of like faith still matters, like, but they feel done with the systems and the programs and the ways in which church leaders have led out in their lives. And they just feel done with that. I feel and I hear the cry of this father. Like Jesus, you don't understand. I believe. Help my unbelief. Because the challenge that I face and I see is sometimes insurmountable. It's a mountain that it's hard to climb. And so there's two things happening here in this statement. I believe is a way of saying I'm taking the first step. I'm taking the first step towards you. Jesus, I believe, but I don't know where that next step is going to lead. So help my unbelief. And the two things can be held at the same time. I love this because I think this is the way of faith. I believe, help my unbelief. I will take a first step. I believe. I don't know where that next step is going to lead, so help me with that. So if you are someone who is in a place where the faith traditions of your life have let you down, but you grab and grasp to something true about Jesus, and you go, man, I want to believe, but I have this unbelief. Can I encourage you with this? Take a first step in belief. That doesn't mean you're going to have all the answers and everything's going to be A-okay and you're going to, everything's going to work out for the good or all those things. Like there's an aspect of just starting with belief and then doing the work to work that out. Part of the reason why this channel exists is because like you, I have lots of questions. And a lot of the ways in which those questions have been answered by leaders in my life have left me felt wanting and incomplete. And so I've had to go on a journey to find that out. I've had to let go of the things that I thought to embrace the things that are actually true. And that has actually led me to a place of more trust in God. There is a way through and a way out of this. It takes you saying, I believe, and be willing to say, help me with my unbelief. And maybe this is a channel that can help you with that. And so I want to encourage you that if you're in that place and you're just going like, I'm ready to walk away and quit it all, I'm done with this whole thing, to slow down, take a sip, breathe, and keep searching. Keep going on this journey. We don't quit Jesus because of the abuse done in his name. The faith in Jesus is a faith that's a thinking faith that challenges and embraces the questions and the wrestling about what's next. And hopefully this channel can be a channel that helps you go on that journey. But if you're in that place, you're not alone. Let's just say that you're not alone. In fact, the text, the scriptures, the writings are full of people who are in the same place you are. I believe, help my unbelief. People who question and doubt. I mean, I can think of Abraham, who doubted the promises of God. I can think of Thomas, who doubted the resurrection. I can think of those in the text, in the Psalms, who lamented and cried out for God when they didn't see him in play and in action in their lives, when they didn't understand what was going on. I believe, help my unbelief. And so if you're in that place of I believe, but maybe just not like I used to, hopefully this is a great place for you to land for a little while as we journey on this together. And so maybe in the comments of this episode, if you've made it this long in this video, because the odds are you hadn't watched until the end. But if you have, I want to encourage you to maybe write some questions in the comments that you've been wrestling with, that your unbelief seems to be growing larger and larger. And maybe I can make a video and we can wrestle together with it. So that being said, thank you for joining me today on another episode of Whiskey and the Writings. Thank you for sitting with me through these thoughts and ideas. So like, subscribe, do that thing if that's, something you're interested in. But I appreciate you being on this journey with me. And until next time, cheers.